One of the best perks about PC gaming has to be the mods. While consoles certainly have these capabilities, it's usually less common simply because it's trickier to obtain and manipulate game files. With the PC, however, these can often be just a couple of clicks away. These mods can range from numbers tweaks in RPGs that help improve the viability of certain strategies, or, the horny degenerate gamers can remove all the clothes from NPCs. But as degenerate as these people can be, a lot of them are really talented at making high quality mods that change the way you play the game. With Elden Ring just on the horizon, this next mod will give you something to tide you over until the February release date. And after seeing some of the recent gameplay footage from the Elden Ring network test, I can confirm that this mod will give you a small taste of what to expect in the game. Today's video, we're covering the Dark Souls 3 Convergence mod. The Convergence mod pretty much makes Dark Souls 3 actually good. Nothing? Really? Alright, whatever. Anyway, a lot of the new gameplay features that were showcased in the Elden Ring network test are actually present here in this mod. Obviously in the mod they're a lot more rough around the edges, but we got things such as tweaks to combat, like adding new magic, redesigns for some of the levels, and even brand new mod created bosses. While it's obviously still going to be Dark Souls 3, the new changes are significant enough to make the playthrough feel different or fresh, even for veterans of the base game. Right out of the gate, we get to see some of these changes in action during character creation. The mod adds a good 10 or so brand new classes to choose from, each brandishing some fancy new equipment or spells. This makes class selection actually somewhat more relevant, as they also gave them gear that is really good throughout an entire playthrough, but tough to find out in the world. A decent example here being the Alchemist class starting with the Gold Serpent Ring, as it's a powerful item that you won't find until much later in the game. In the base game, the gear was pretty much immediately replaceable since it was only starting gear, and oftentimes better gear was found as soon as you started exploring the world. Like, hey, welcome to Dark Souls 3, where the story is basic and the starting classes don't matter. Alright, fine, I'll stop it with the dumb jokes. Now, don't get me wrong, you'll still be able to deviate from your starting class and build your characters however you like, but this time, picking a class related to your desired end build will expedite that process significantly, unlike before. Now, getting to some of the main gameplay changes, we're going to start with combat. Here, the modders have added a ton of new weapons with unique weapon arts and overhauled the magic system substantially. One of the most fun aspects of the mod is experimenting with this new magic, especially going out and blasting enemies to the moon with crazy strong late game spells. There's just so many new crazy additions here, like raining down meteors onto your enemies or summoning giant crabs to do your bidding. Aside from simply adding new spells to the game, the developers have reworked the schools of magic as well. The classic schools are divided further, such as differentiating pyromancies and geomancies by giving geomancies their own flame, their own covenant, and adding more spells for geomancy, while also adding entirely new schools of magic, such as druid, necromancy, and blood magic. Each school usually specializes in a damage type, air magic doing physical damage for example. Some of these schools will use familiar spells previously lacking a home, Na is inside of the blood magic school, but for the most part they come with their own unique spells to play around with. The amount of diversity here is fantastic, and it gives you so much more to think about and consider when it comes to approaching combat. It also gives a distinct feeling to magic-focused playstyles, instead of just the lame spammer shooting lightning or soul arrows, or the simple spellblade only using spells to buff a weapon. After seeing new Elden Ring gameplay, it appears they also went down this route of enhancing magic to be cool and awesome, which is great news for me. These magic changes are accompanied by your FP now also slowly regenerating. This is a huge change that helps casters be more spell focused while also being a slight buff to weapons, allowing them to use weapon arts more freely. In the past, it was far too demanding, requiring significant stat allocation and reduced healing potential to play as a pure caster. You pretty much always needed an offhand weapon to deal with fodder or risk running out of mana during your exploration. For boss fights, you always had to find room to use your Ashen Estus, which constantly hindered your DPS. All of this made pure casting, as in no side weapon at all, only using spells, pretty much unviable outside of challenge runs. Well, that's no longer the case. While the FP regen is a huge buff to magic playstyles, it also makes weapon arts usable throughout an area. Now you could go full anime on enemies, comboing them into oblivion and regen so that you still have FP for future encounters, while also retaining your Estus to heal with. Thus, I believe going forward into Elden Ring, which does have recent gameplay footage confirming FP making a return, I hope that this is a change that was made. Unfortunately, as I was writing the script, Elden Ring footage finally came out, deconfirming FP regen being a thing. I kind of expected as much, and it does seem like there's more options available to the player to maintain a high level of FP in between different encounters, but still a little disappointed. It sounds super strong and unbalanced when you first think about it, but honestly it makes so many more options viable, and the regen is slow enough that it doesn't actually break the game. Knowing Elden Ring didn't actually take this regenerating FP idea, I'm hoping the crafting system they did reveal provide enough options to restoring FP otherwise. Speaking of the crafting system, there's actually something a little more basic but similar inside of the Convergence mod. The Convergence mod instead has what is known as an alchemy system. With this system, you can take the alchemy reagent covenant item that you obtained by being part of the alchemist covenant and use them to craft consumables that you'll find throughout the game. Consumables can be crafted while sitting at a bonfire and range from a whole host of pretty much every consumable item in the base game and some unique ones to the mod. These different items are incredibly awesome, and when I watched some of the gameplay footage for Elden Ring, I noticed that they actually had some similar things baked into their crafting system. Honestly, the alchemist system is one of my favorite aspects about the mod, so I'm really happy to see something similar showing up in Elden Ring. The modders didn't just stop at revamping the combat side of things, as there are several changes to the world itself. At the most basic level, the enemies and bonfires have been changed around, kind of giving a slightly fresh feel to traversing the world. Now you'll be forced to find the new bonfire locations before you can rest, making it harder to run through areas that you will otherwise be familiar with. On a slightly higher level, there are new pathways to traversing different levels. Some areas that were blocked at first are now open, while other areas that were normally accessible are now blocked instead. These are minor changes, but they can occasionally disorient even a veteran player, making the journey feel a little bit new and kind of different. The changes to enemy placement continue this trend of minor changes creating a sense of new while also being thematically appropriate for the area. As we start to elevate away from the more basic changes, the modders also made it so that some of the enemies will face off against one another. This adds a lot of life into the world now, since it feels lived in and not just populated by enemies that exist solely as a moving obstacle for the player. The best example of this is in the cathedral. There's now a group of knights that are facing off against a bunch of blood mages. These two factions are now here for a reason, and that serves a greater purpose in defining the world. Now the enemies have purpose or meaning, exhibiting a sense of agency even if it's in a small capacity. The modders, they didn't stop there however, and went even further beyond by creating entirely new enemies and structures. The new enemies, they're really creative and take a lot from existing ideas, and some even serve as mini-bosses that are guarding hidden treasure. They're pretty tough though, so you better come prepared for a fight. As for the structures, some locations have completely new ladders, platforms, and bridges that add new pathways and traversal options through an area. I find this to be pretty impressive, especially in some areas where they design entire zones built by them. And now don't get me wrong, I love when they add a new way to navigate the level, there's a sense of freshness there, but there's something special about seeing fan-created content built from scratch. The best example is in a tower in the Profaned Capital that contains a mini-boss and a maze inside, all of which was completely absent from the base game. I don't intend to show you what it looks like in footage, I don't want to spoil it, it's such a fun thing to discover on your own, so I highly recommend you play the game or maybe check out a playthrough from another content creator. But wait, there's more. What's a Dark Souls game without some great bosses? Bosses are a huge aspect of the Dark Souls experience, and these modders decided to not only rework some of the existing bosses, but add in entirely new ones designed by them. It's fun to see how creative they were in utilizing existing movesets from other bosses, but also make them look unique. Veterans and such might recognize some of the reused assets, but the fights as a whole stand out on their own. One of the earliest examples of this is an Undead Settlement. This will be a minor spoiler, so if you don't want to see, look or click away, but it's the first newly added boss. Feel free to skip ahead to this time in order to avoid the spoilers. Anyway, in the Undead Settlement where the giant crappy tree boss is instead now the boss room for a druid hermit. The tree is just completely removed. Good riddance. This new boss uses druid magic, but also has some recognizable moves from Champion Gundyr. They don't over-rely on these moves, however, making this fight feel new and refreshing, and honestly, it's just a damn cool fight. I really love the finger snap that he does to send out some of his magic. I don't know, just something cool about that. Alright, the spoiler is gone. Alongside these types of brand new fights that they added, they also reworked a lot of the underwhelming fights, such as completely changing High Lord Wolnir or slightly improving the Yorm fight. For some, this is just moveset improvements that adds one or two new moves to the already existing fight in order to make it more challenging or more dynamic, but other times they completely redesign the boss fight or even add new phases. Some of the boss fights are also moved around and not found in their original location, so sometimes you'll be surprised with a new fight that you weren't expecting. Honestly, this type of stuff is really next level in terms of modding, and why I say the mod completely overhauls the entire game. All in all, there's a ton of stuff being changed here, shaking up the entire game and making it feel fresh and new, even for veterans of the game. Obviously, there's still some familiarity here, especially if you're like myself and have hundreds of hours into the base game, but I think it's new enough and different enough that it's worth checking out. If you're still waiting for Elden Ring, shoutouts to the people watching this in the future who have it already. What are you doing? Go play it. Anyway, if you're still awaiting Elden Ring and craving a new Dark Souls journey, I highly recommend you give this mod a playthrough in the meantime. It's really fun, and it adds enough new things to make it feel fresh, and honestly, I'm just gonna go ahead and say it, it's better than the base game itself. So that's going to wrap up my Dark Souls 3 Convergence Mod video. As I said throughout the video, I do think that this could be a decent introduction to the types of things we might expect from Elden Ring. As I was watching the network test footage, I noticed that a lot of the mechanics and improvements that were prevalent throughout this mod were prevalent in Elden Ring. I think that's a really good sign, and I'm really excited to see what Elden Ring has to offer when it finally releases. To everyone who made it this far in the video, I really appreciate you tuning in and watching my content. If you did enjoy the content, it would mean quite a lot to me if you could jump down below and hit that like button. It shows your support and helps the channel out with the algorithm and such, so it would mean quite a lot. In terms of future content, if that's something you might be interested in from my channel, feel free to hit the subscribe button and the bell notification icon while you're down there. I do intend to cover some more Elden Ring content once that finally releases, so you could look forward to that, and then other random games that I find interesting. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and wrap up here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. See you next time.